Hello, everybody. Glad to have you come on in for today's webinar. This is, I see a lot of people are starting to roll in. Perfect. Kind of introduce ourselves and kind of get ready to go, take care of a couple of small little things, and then we'll go ahead and get started. First thing, as you guys are all rolling in, a lot of you have been here before. I appreciate that. We really enjoy having everybody here chatting. The first thing you might want to do is in the chat box when you have that open, and I see some folks are chatting. The first two I see is one from the Netherlands and one from Canada. Boise, Chicago, Spain. Thank you all for coming from all around the world. I appreciate that. In that chat box, if you there's a little panel down below where you type in. If you when it always defaults to all panelists, which means only us from AIM are going to see your comments. So make sure you hit the little pull down arrow and change that to all panelists and attendees. That will allow everybody that's in the chat to see what you write. So that's important. So do all of that. I appreciate everybody here saying hi to everybody. That's what the chat box is all about. We use it in a couple different ways as we go as well, but certainly everybody getting up to speed. Robbie is there doing his normal linking of cool things for you to go take a look at, and he may do a few more as we go through the day here today as well. The other one is make sure you open up your question and answer box. The question and answer box is where if you want Cameron and I to see, what you a question that you have, make sure you plug it into the Q&A box. That is where the guys working in the background who've been here all of the time, they're answering some questions that show up in there as well. If it's something they can answer real quickly, but if it's something that we want to answer and include into this live webinar, Cameron or I will see that and we will answer it there as well. So appreciate that. Perfect. Let's start off with a quick poll just to kind of get everybody up to speed. And as we're kind of rolling in, I'm gonna launch a poll, and it's one that we've done before, and it continues to help us understand and where we want to go. And it's what AIM Sports hardware do you own and use? The select all that apply. I mean, it's a multiple choice poll. So there's the option. We only have 10 options in our poll. So the last one down there is SmartyCam and other. If you've got something else that you're using, go ahead and throw it in. Click on the other box and put it up into the chat box. Other equals whatever it happens to be. I see a Micron 5 for boat racing, one of my favorite motorsports to go to. I really enjoy that. I'm up here in Seattle, Washington area, where we do a lot of hydroplanes and boats. So I love it when I get out there and see just tons of Micron 5s in the boats. So go ahead and finish up on that poll there, and then we will I'll move that out of the way. If you've already voted, click on the submit button. It'll go away too, and that'll get it out of your screen. Perfect. Today we're going to talk about something that we get some questions on, and it's come up in some of the chat and some of the Q&A, and it was one of those that we've been wanting to do, and it kind of ties into a couple of other things that I think will be interesting for us as we chat about things. But it's calculating of gear position. It's not only, certainly we're going to talk about gear position and how to calculate it, both in Race Studio 3 and putting it onto the displays that you have, the data loggers that you have, and doing it in real time. And we're also going to go back after that and okay, now we've gathered some data and we don't have gear position. How do we calculate it in Race Studio 2 analysis? But we're also going to then show you a couple of XY plots and maybe a couple of other math channels that make this even a more interesting topic. If gear position is something that you maybe already have based on a sensor or something, we're going to do some things to make this interesting for you as well. So keep that in mind. The gear position thing is one of those things that some people just really want it, and maybe they want it in their car while they're driving, or maybe they only want it for analysis. There's different times when you may want this particular channel. So one of the other things that I'd like to almost immediately go up with a poll before we even jump into our introductions is this poll, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. And I did kind of ran out of ideas. I don't know what all of your reasons might be, so I put together this poll like this. And the question is gear position. Why is it important to you, and how do you use it? And it's multiple choice, and I've only got a few of them there, but I did add an other. And if there's some other reason that you might want to use it, I would love to understand that. Click on the other and then note it into the chat. That's a great thing as well. But you know, many people, these other 5 of them are kind of where I think most of them are. During the driving, you want to be able to look down at some point. Of course, during data analysis, that is a you know, a key one. For gear dependent shift lights, you know, if you do not have a gear sensor and you want to do gear dependent shift lights, in other words, have your shift lights vary if you're in 2nd or 4th or 5th gear, we have to have that calculated, or a sensor or calculated on the display. So that's another reason to do it. Sequential gearboxes are you know, notorious. You know, I got to try to find neutral and you know, and things like that. And sometimes we would like to have a gear position on the display for that. Pit lane speed help. Sometimes what you know to do is, you know, 3rd gear at 3,200, you know, something like that. So pit lane speed help, it might be a choice of yours. So just another you know, 30 seconds or so, we'll let that go, and then we'll come back and we'll share the results of that. So appreciate that. Here we go. Let's go ahead and get ready to end that polling. If you haven't voted, jump right in, and then we will end that right about now. And then let's share those results. Give everybody an idea of what's going on here. This will help Cameron and I understand maybe even a little bit about who's here and what they really want to kind of look at, right? So yeah, as you can tell, during data analysis, you know, once you've downloaded the data, you looked at it, we want to know what gear we were in, why we were you know, running around the track on turn 3, what gear were we in, where did we upshift, where did we downshift, that kind of thing was 95%. The next one is during driving. 25% of folks wanted to see, you know, hey, I want that on the display. A lot of our displays have, you know, very large gear position graphics on them, and we want to take a look at it there. Gear dependent shift lights. I thought that one might be fairly big. It's 3rd, 19%. We want to be able to have those, you know, set those where we can have our shift lights change depending on what gear we're in. And then sequential gearboxes and pit lane help, and then other down there at you know, at 3%. I appreciate that, and Cameron does, I'm sure, as well. And so let's go ahead and stop sharing those results, get those out of the way. Let's go bring that over here. Okay. The next thing I'd like to do is jump right in. We're going to talk about, again, calculating gear position, Race Studio 2, Race Studio 3. Our co-host today is Cameron. Cameron's been to virtually all of these. I think he's missed one because of a trip that he had to take, you know, an aimsports, you know, trackside support trip he needed to do. But other than that, Cameron's been here at all of them. He's been working behind the scenes, you know, hard, making sure that all these questions are answered and comments and conversing back and forth with all of you guys. Cameron's going to be here today helping me with calculating gear position. Cameron's been along a long time. I enjoy Cameron. He's all the way on the other side of the country, but when we do get together, we have a good time. Cameron, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start to chat about gear position.
All right. Thanks for the introduction, Roger. Like Roger said, my name is Cameron Bennett, and I do work in the East Coast office, so in Roanoke, Virginia. I was actually born and raised in Roanoke, Virginia, and just got really lucky to be able to follow my passion, and you know, always enjoyed cars growing up, and just got really lucky. So, so today I will be helping with a couple math channels, their differences, and you know, sometimes they're just looked over. You know, some of our customers don't know that they exist, and some may just need a little help with them. So that's what we're going to do today. Robertson actually touched on the math channels in an earlier webinar. I'm sure Robbie can link that if you guys want to check that out. But we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the calculation today to make sure that it's well covered. And so the 2 math channels that we'll be covering today are going to be the calculated gear and the pre-calculated gear. So this is going to be used if no gear, potentiometer, or ECU channel is available. So that's what we'll be doing today.
Perfect. And then Robbie's going to talk about some of those things, and then I'm sorry, Cameron's going to talk about some of those things. I was reading the chat. Cameron's going to be chatting about a couple of those things, and then it's going to come back to me, and I'm going to open up Race Studio 2, and we're going to do what a good chunk of you were talking about was, maybe calculate the gear position afterwards, and then we'll go into a couple XY plots and share a couple of other math channels that I think you might be interested in as well when we go to close all this up. So Cameron, why don't you go ahead and share your screen so we can look at Race Studio 3 and start talking about calculated gear and pre-calculated gear for all the new current hardware.
All right, make sure I get this right. All right, perfect. So I've noticed on a couple of webinars that we kind of blow past the easy parts that we all take for granted. So I just wanted to show it from the very beginning that, this is, the Race Studio 3 depends on how you have your settings set up, but I always have mine set up to where I open up to the configuration. So I've got my MXG 1.2 here, a new configuration, just by clicking new. And so we're going to double click to open, and what we're going to be working on today is going to be the math channels. So we'll go over to the math channels tab. And so the first on our list to go over today is going to be the calculated gear. So this is a bit of an easier setup in the software, but in execution, it's a little bit more difficult than other things that we'll talk about today, but we'll be going over that soon. So calculated gear here gives you a little description. It's to calculate the gear position from engine RPM and vehicle speed. So not a ton of information to base off of, but it does work pretty well. So once you click OK there, you get a little window that pops up, and it will tell you, your math channel settings. So you've got your name, first things first. Roger and I talk about this, and we definitely agree that we think that this should stay as calculated gear. We think that it's always nice, if you're sending your data to somebody, or if you forgot what you were using, it's nice to know that this gear was calculated and that it didn't come from the ECU or a gear potentiometer or anything like that. So definitely leave it calculated gear. If you want to cut it down, you could change it to calc gear or whatever makes you happy there. So the next item down is going to be our sampling frequency. So the sampling frequency, this doesn't play a role actually in the calculation. So when you're driving around the track, calculating the gear, this is just a matter of saving the data. So with that information, it doesn't really make much sense to increase this beyond 10 Hertz. So we definitely recommend just leaving this at 10 Hertz. It's going to give you the best readout later on.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you do these webinars and start to dig into some stuff that we've all been working with these for years, right? And Cameron, you may have found the same thing. I know other folks that have co-hosted or helped us with some of these. The more we dig in to try to teach something, the more we learn. That very topic right there, I did not understand fully. I thought it was the calculation rate. And it's so cool to be able to learn as we go, and we learn more and more things where that is just the output of the data that is being thrown into the data file. And so right. It's calculating it much quicker than that in real time behind the scenes, very, very fast as it can. But it's that sampling frequency, that's just what it's being, 10 times per second is what it's being used to throw it into the data file. Just a cool thing is when we all learn every single day in everything we do, and it's kind of a cool thing.
Right, we go through these different channels so frequently that you think you know exactly what you're talking about, but when we do the deep dive to get ready to present it to everybody, I definitely learned a couple of things. Yeah, so pretty cool. That was cool. An interesting one.
Very cool.
So now the next thing down, this is where we're going to start the actual calculation. So we've got RPM. So the big thing here with RPM is that you just want to make sure that you have a clean RPM signal. So we're basing this channel on 2 channels. So having any outliers with RPM or speed is just going to cause issues. Having a clean RPM channel is going to be the best case scenario. So I've actually set up an RPM channel in our configuration. So it's an analog, it's not coming from the ECU. So we'll go into the source, choose our AB channels, and just choose RPM and click OK. So after you do that, this will actually be grayed out because you should only have 1 RPM input. So if you made a mistake, you shouldn't be able to choose anything else other than RPM. But if you made a mistake, you can always go back in and delete it, and we'll actually go over that in a little bit. But so RPM is chosen, and so next we've got speed. And so like I was saying, same with the RPM, it's just making sure that you've got a clean functioning wheel speed sensor that is giving accurate readings. That's going to yield your best results. Now, I don't want to gloss over on the wheel speed itself. It is recommended to use a drive wheel speed that is directly linked to the transmission and engine rotation once the clutch discs are completely engaged. So this is just giving us the most realistic view of what's actually happening with the vehicle. So GPS speed isn't going to be giving you the most accurate information of what's going on with the vehicle. So you've got your option for GPS if you must, but it is best to be using a driven wheel speed. So I've got a wheel speed set up here, and if it's a rear-wheel drive vehicle, rear speed is best. So we'll choose that. So we've got those two things taken care of there. And then, so let's see, the next thing we've got down is going to be the shift time. So like Roger and I were speaking earlier about how we learn things, I actually learned something here. So on the pre-calculated gear, there would be a little bit of a bubble that will pop up here that will explain it. And we've actually asked to have this transferred over to this side as well. But so it's commonly misunderstood. So this is actually going to be the time that the measured values have to be held to be set as a valid gear change. So this is an effort to try and reduce unwanted gear changes. So we have to make sure that we have a steady RPM signal after to make sure that we are going into the next gear properly. So we found that 0.3 seconds is actually a good way to put that. And it just, like I said, it just helps reduce unwanted gear changes. So we've got the shift time and then highest gear number. It's how many gears do you have? Not neutral or reverse included there. So next step, be clicking save, and so it's saved. So actually, move away a little bit. So we've got calculated gear now set up. So the one thing I wanted to show you is just setting it up as a display. Due to the poll, it doesn't seem like a lot of people like to see it during driving. It looked like maybe about a quarter of you, but so we do have a lot of these display pages that there is a spot for gear that really it just looks like it makes sense to have it there. And if you're going to be using it, you might as well be able to see it as well. So you can go in here and just go to math channels and then calculated gear. And I always go and just do a drag and drop. So we'll drag and drop it there, and then your calculated gear will be there after you click transmit. That's the big key one here. You have to be connected to your dash and click transmit. That's going to send it off, and you will be, your next step actually will be to go over the calculation process. So that's what's going to make this process in execution a little bit more difficult because the others don't require it. So I'm actually going to share a different screen really quick. Let's see here. So this is actually, so I'm going to give a shout out to our website here. So we have a really great frequently asked questions section. And so when going over and trying to make sure I got everything set up properly for this webinar, I referenced the website, and this actually gives you the procedure right here to go through and do that, the learning process. So I'm not going to read it to you verbatim, but basically it starts, the procedure starts after you transmit to the dash, when the speed is different from 0, and then you're just going through each gear and going back down through each gear. So I have asked Robbie to put that in the chat. I'm not sure, I don't have the chat up.
He does have it there and showing already, so it's linked for everybody. Okay. So good job.
Perfect. So we've got that there, so you can read through that. Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and just get that put in the right spot, and then now we are going to switch back.
While you're doing that, I'm gonna let me handle a couple of questions that came up while you're getting yourself set up.
Okay.
The first one I'll do is Harry mentions, if you're calculating gear, why do you need a top gear in the template? If you're going to calculate it afterwards in RayStudio 2, yeah, maybe you don't. And I will talk about how we limit those gear numbers when we do the math channel in RayStudio 2. And but here, what it really is looking for, and I'll even prove it to you a little bit in RayStudio 2 and a little bit later. What it's really looking for is the RPM versus speed, and you're going to see a bunch of dots, and it just needs to know how many gears are in there, so it knows which gear, which one to assign with the gear position. So that's why you need to actually plug in the actual numbers. So there you go, Cameron. Just jump back in to the next one.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, so now the next one that we're going to go over is actually going to be the pre-calculated gear. So we can't have two gear calculations within the same configuration. So we're going to go through and delete this one first. And so the way to do that is you just go over here to the gear and click delete selected math channel. Oh.
Needs to maybe stop sharing your screen. So let me, you go ahead and start to fix that back up. I got one other question that I'm going to answer while you're fixing that up. Ian asked a question. How do I tell the aim system that we don't use first gear on many tracks because it's too low? The Brick answered the question in the Q&A, but there's really not much of a reason to that. If you still want it to know that there's a first gear there, even if you don't use it, because when you're leaving the pits and doing, maybe you spun out or something, it'd be nice to be able to, when you go to first gear, that it knows it's there. So it's good to tell it that you have 6 or 7 speed or 5 speed or whatever happens to be. It's a good thing to have. So it's I still do tell it that first gears are that I have the total of 6, and that's how I would handle that, Ian. So. Looks like you're back up and running there, Cameron. Looks like Zoom may have jumped out on us. So what do you have going there now, Cameron?
Well, so I'm not sure what happened, but went through and deleted the math channel. But we'll go back in and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So we'll just go ahead and move back onto the pre-calculated gear. So again, we do have the quick description here. So this is very similar to calculated gear, except we're just adding a few things. So we're calculating the gear position from engine RPM and vehicle speed, specifying the gear ratio for each gear and the axle ratio. So we're going to select that and press OK, and that should open up the very similar channel settings, except we're obviously adding a few things. So same thing here with the name. We want to leave it as pre-calc gear if you can. Obviously it's not required. You can change it if you'd like to, but we do recommend leaving it there. Sampling frequency, same. Leave it at 10 hertz, and then basically all of this at the very beginning is going to be the same. Just making sure you have a clean RPM signal and speed. So we'll go through here and choose these channels again. So analog, digital, RPM. And then our speed channel, we're going to go to the AB channels and the right rear speed. All right, so we've got all of those things chosen. So down below that is where the new things, where the pre-calculation is going to start. So we've got our next item down is going to be the wheel circumference. And so this, this can be measured in a couple different ways. You could use an equation. Do diameter times pi if you like. You can measure around the wheel, and so it's a wheel and tire. There's some different ideas there around the meaning of wheel, but we wheel and tire, and it'll get you the same result.
It's over in the chat box. Somebody asked that same question just before you started it, Cameron. Wheel or tire circumference? It's where the rubber meets the road in this particular case. What is the full? How many inches does it take to make a full rotation? And like Cameron mentioned, there's a bunch of different ways to do that. And one of the things that I found, I didn't have a nice little tire circumference tape, because if you use a regular tape, they don't get a good number. And one of the things I did is car's down on the ground, it's in the shop, it's in the garage, whatever, put a drop of oil on the tire a piece of chalk, a piece of crayon, whatever. And then when you roll the car, one full rotation, that whatever you put on the tire, the little drip of oil, makes 2 marks on the pavement, and you can quickly string out your tape and take a quick measurement. The other thing that I used to do with the off-road stuff, that the tires were so big, that I would just take a small string or a rope and wrap it around, hold on the end, pull it out, lay it out, have a buddy help me, and then measure the length of that little string. So if you don't have one of those cool little tapes, that's a couple of ways to get to that wheel circumference. And then a question in the Q&A that kind of fits in right here from Aaron Turner. What is there a way to use the calc gear, pre-calc gear with a motorcycle and driven wheel speed? How can we calculate for the change of the tire profile as the bike lanes over? That is a big change with bikes compared to cars, and there is no way that I know of that this is going to handle that. What you will see is as you lay it over and the tire circumference basically becomes a smaller tire when you lay it over. You might get a quick little gear flicker as it goes up. If that's happening to you, what I would do is take the shift time and maybe bump that up a little bit longer. So the bike has to be it has to sit in there for 3 or 4 tenths, maybe take it up to half a second before it actually makes that change. So when you're bringing your bike up, it waits for just a little bit and calculates it correctly. So great question by Aaron. Go ahead, Cameron.
Yeah. So the last thing I really wanted to touch on with the wheel circumference. So we have our options up here at the top left. So I have mine set in inches because I'm using all standard units. So you can change everything over to metric, and you will be using this will be measured in millimeters here. So so now our the next thing down is going to be our axle ratio. So these are those little bubbles I was talking about earlier. So if you just hover over the question mark, it'll actually tell you what you're looking to achieve here. So the axle ratio is the value of the TL divided by TM. So TL is going to be the number of teeth of the load gear, and TM is the number of teeth of the main gear. So what you're looking for here is the rear gear ratio. That's really what you're looking for. So the great thing about actually the axle ratio here and the gear ratio, if you look at the very bottom, this can actually be expressed in a decimal style value, or you can leave it in a fractional, just making sure that you have it, set up properly. You don't want to have 17/54 set up that way. So let's see, the next thing we've got down here is going to be shift time. So we covered shift time. So, this is the bubble that we were trying to get put back in. So basically the the shift time is the time that the measured values have to hold to be set as value. So it's just ensuring that it's a real gear change, and it's just making sure that it's valid. Highest gear number, again, choosing your gear, neutral and reverse, not selected or included. Sorry. So our gear ratio. This is all information that should be able to be found. We have customers that will find it from the internet. You can grab it sometimes from your user manual. If you have aftermarket gears, you should be able to find it from that person. But same thing, this can be expressed in your decimal or in a fractional value. If you need help, you can go over the bubble and it will give you the what it's looking for there. So
as you're plugging those in, Cameron, to start that process, Antonio asked the question that you did actually answer just as he was bringing it up, but to know the values of the gear ratio and the shift time, should we look at the workshop manual, or is an approximation enough? An approximation is not enough in the gear ratios, the axle ratio and the forward driven speeds. You need to have those because it's looking at the RPM, what the RPM should be when it's going from a transmission, from the crankshaft through a gear ratio, transmission, third gear, whatever it happens to be, then out all the way back to the rear gear, out through the tire size. It's doing the math on that in real time, and when it finds that there's a match there, that's when it knows to show fourth gear. So that's the answer to that one. Okay, and then, Cameron, plug in some numbers.
Well, actually, I didn't bring that sheet over here with me for some reason.
Just plug in any
Yeah,
old
I
number.
mean,
Just
so
yeah,
we can, I mean, so off memory, we could do like
yeah,
3895.
yeah.
And then
Doesn't
generally
matter.
you're going to see, I mean, a larger number shifting down. So
There you go.
we could do like 3.586, and then, you know, you'll see like a, you know, 3.256. And so you just plug in your numbers.
And from as mentioned in that question, you can find these numbers if you've got a Miata or a Ford Mustang or whatever it happens to be. Just do a quick search and you can find the stock gear ratios for that particular car, and plug them in.
Yep. And so basically you're just going through, plugging in these numbers, and so we'll go ahead and finish this 0.852. And you can actually, one thing I learned while messing around with this, you can actually tab through these as well, which is actually
nice. Yeah, makes it much quicker.
Yeah. So last step here in this screen, at least, is to go through and sorry, my Zoom it keeps popping up. Then we'll click save. And so, you know, going through with the display, it's going to be the exact same thing. We're going to go to the math channels. We'll find the pre-calc gear, and you just drag it onto your display wherever you like for it to be. And then after you're done with that, transmit. And so in comparison between the calculated gear and the pre-calculated gear, the great thing about pre-calculated gear is that you don't have to go out and do that learning lap. It's already pre-calculated. So you go out and you start driving, and as long as, you know, all the information that we put in there is correct, you'll start getting gear immediately afterwards. So.
Yeah, the pre-calc gear is by far my favorite of the two. We're typically going to know what our gear ratio is and our individual gears, and we do not have to do that process of going out and having it learn, right? As shown in that document that Cameron shows there. So for me, it's a little bit of extra work to do to get all the right numbers for the pre-calculated gear, but it's my experience personally, and then my experience of chatting with users, is pre-calculated gear is almost flawless. If you've plugged it in correctly and you go and you transmit it into your gauge, you could put the car up on jack stands and just run through the gears, and the gear ratio is, I mean, the gear position on your display is just going to be right off the bat, let alone out on the track, right? Since you're using a driven wheel. So it is well worth the extra little bit of effort to do the pre-calculated gear, in my opinion.
Absolutely agree.
Cameron, there's a question here that talks about the whole difference of motorcycles versus cars when it comes to the gear ratios that you plugged in there. We just plugged in a rear gear ratio because that's more of a, you know, the sports car kind of a thing. But when you have a bike and you have ratios and you have tire sizes and you have the sprockets, how do we handle, you know, plugging in something that's, you know, through a bike or a bike motor that's in a sports car?
Well, so, you know, basically what we're going to have to do is, if there is a final transmission, you were going to go through and multiply the primary and final transmission ratio together and type the final type the final result in the axle ratio box. So I will show you. I'll go back in Race Studio 3, and so this will go back to the math channels, and you just double click to edit, and your axle ratio here. So that's what you're going to have to do.
Yep. So in the end, we have to just, if there's a multiple step, some of the off-road trucks will have and even sprint cars and some other things, they may have a quick change, you know, or an underdrive, and that just needs to be factored into your rear gear and your front and rear sprockets or whatever it happens to be. You just got to do the math. This has to be the ratio that it's changing after it comes out of the gearbox, in effect, right? So, okay, perfect. Perfect. Sounds like, looks like we got all the questions and answers kind of handled from that. Any other comments or questions you have, Cameron, as we're kind of heading out of that piece of this?
Not on this subject, no. I think we covered it really well. You know, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A and see if there's anything new that pops up in relation to this, and we can circle back around if need be. But I think that pretty much covers it. Perfect.
Let me share my screen, and we'll jump into Race Studio 2, and just to chat about the couple things that Cameron hit on that I wanted to didn't want to jump back and forth with different pieces of software. So he talked about having a clean RPM and speed trace. And the best way to do that, frankly, is in a previous run, the weekend before you're going to start setting this up or whatever, grab some of your data and take a look at it. This is some data that we've used in previous webinars. This is the 488 challenge car that Ray Phillips showed some pretty cool things that he has done with his driver coaching. So I just grabbed this because it did have an ECU gear position, and then we're going to calculate some, and I just wanted to be able to compare it against a known sensor values. Thought it would be kind of interesting. But what you want to look at is make sure that there's no big spikes. That you have a dirty either speed trace or RPM trace. If they're not really good and clean data sources, it's going to be harder for either the data logger or the RayStudio software afterwards to do those calculations. So take a look at your data and make sure that it's fairly nice and clean. So the next thing that I would do is let's talk about how this actually is working in the background. I was thinking about it as we were getting ready to prepare for this, and how do we do a quick a visual of how this is actually working. And what I did is I set up an XY plot, and let's chat about what this actually is and what we're actually looking at here. In this particular case, I've got on this XY axis, on the Y axis on the left side going up and down, I've just got the speed of the car, and it's a full lap, and across the bottom I've got RPM. Those are the two channels that that Cameron talked about that we use in the device or later on now in the software to do the math. And you can see by looking at these that you've got these basic lines of data, right? And you kind of see these clusters of dots that are together. And you can see that this car was during this lap was in 4 different gear ratios, right? And if I turn on the gear channel, and what the software is really doing, either the firmware on the logger or now the software in RayStudio 2, is we look, and when these dots are falling in this array right here, in this line, this 45-degree line, we then take do the math with some float. You've got some dots that are flowing out here where you're on and off the throttle, and maybe shift points when you got the clutch in, but you see the trends of the lines. When those lines are in that, let me turn on the gear, the position. So that's 6th gear. That's the red line is gear position. The green one is the speed based on the RPM across the bottom. When the computer sees, or the logger sees that the dots are falling in this line, it automatically shows to you these red dots, which is 6th gear. When you downshift and you're in 5th gear now and they're falling into this row, you start to see that it's a 5th gear, and the software can do that. It has to be in this little line with a buffer, and once it's in there and once it gets locked together, it says, okay, well, you're in 5th gear, and that's what we show you. That's the base. There's deeper math than that, obviously, but this I thought presented it in a way that you could kind of tell what it kind of looks like. So the next thing that Cameron talked about a lot, and this is very, very clear when I do it here, is this is GPS speed. Remember we talked about which speed sensor should I use, and you're going to have, hopefully you have some options, but you have GPS speed, and that is a speed that is certainly is accurate and it's good enough for everything we do, but there's not a direct connection to the engine crankshaft when the clutch is out, right? It's a little floaty. There's some, you're rotating around corners, you're doing all these things, and you can tell that there's a lot of green dots all over the place here, right? Let me change that to a front wheel speed. It's a wheel speed, but yet it's still not that direct link that Cameron talked about where it's great to have that direct link of a driven wheel. In this case, this is a rear wheel drive car. So let's bring up the front wheel speeds, and let's turn off the GPS speed, turn on that. Look how much cleaner and how much more of those dots fall into a nice line, okay? That makes it much easier for the logger or for the computer later to understand that they're falling into that line, and then boom, display third, fourth, fifth, or 6th gear for us in this particular instance, okay? And now that's a front wheel, so that's still not even a direct connection. So let's throw the rear wheel, and bring it up and scale it. Look at that rear wheel speed compared to the GPS and the front wheel ones that we had. This is why we always suggest that if you have the option, it is much better to grab a driven wheel speed sensor data. So there, once the clutch has been released and you're off the clutch and you're throttled down and you're going, these become very, very much better locked RPM versus speeds, and it's a way easier for us to calculate a very, very good calculated gear to show you on the display or in the software later. So I thought hopefully I'm going to bounce back to GPS speed and turn that one off. See how much float there is in that one. And if we go to the front wheel speed and turn off GPS speed, it's better. It certainly would work good. And then to do a driven wheel speed, it is very clear that getting a nice, good, clean speed sensor trace that is on your driven wheel will help with this process. Okay.
Yeah,
perfect.
I think that's great. I think it really helps show why so much better.
Perfect. The next thing that I wanted to show is let's jump out of that, and I've just saved a couple of user profiles. And by the way, this data, these user profiles, and these math channels I'm about to show you, as we always do, will be available in a few hours on the YouTube site. In the description box below, it'll say show more if you don't see it at first, but click on that. We'll have links to the data, the user profiles, and the math channels that we're going to talk about here. Okay, so you'll be able to get that stuff later. So let's go into the measures. Oops, I wanted a user profile, and I've just got one that's called home. It just kind of gets me back here. Turn the measures on. Let's talk about the math channel that you can do afterwards. Our poll showed that 95% of you really want this data to be during data analysis, and it was about 25% of you, and I still have the poll running over here on the side. 25% of you really wanted it during the run, and there's good times that you might want it during the run, but most of you really are after it later. If that's true, maybe you skip doing the pre-calculated gear on the hardware and you just do all the math here later, right? It's up to you how you wish to do it. We have math channels. They're already canned, they're already built, they're ready for you to take a look at in Race Studio 2. So I've got this ECU gear that's right from a sensor on in the Ferrari 488 Challenge car, and you can see how it's popping up here to 6th gear, and then here's its downshifts, but let's calculate one. And let's calculate one just like you would. I'll start from scratch. If you have not used math channels before, I'm going to walk you through the entire process of creating a math channel here for gear calculation. So we go up to the math channel functionality, and we click on that. And if you have not done any math channel work before, we've got a session tab and we've got a general tab. Under your session tab, there will not be any math channels there if you have not done some in the past and have them automatically being added to every test you open. So a lot of you are going to see this. So how do I build one? That it's pretty. You look at this box and you go, okay, well, where do I start, right? So, but what AIM has done for you is under your general tab, there's a bunch of math channels here that have an AIM prefix. If you look at that, one of those is AIM gear. And this dialog box, it's when I first started working with it, it was like, okay, well, that's, I understand how that works, and it's, whatever. But then as I started to use it more, this is really brilliant in how this works. And I think it has become, I've thought about other things. I thought, well, how do I help, them maybe design this to do a little bit differently? I like the way it works. We're in the general tab. I want to bring AIM gear and I want to put it into the test that we're working with, right? So AIM gear, I've got this little cut, copy, paste box down here in the bottom. So I'm just going to add that over to here. I'm going to go back to my actual session tab where there's nothing over there, and then I'm going to paste that in. And then when I highlight that, you end up with the basic math channel. Now it is default. It is we have to do some things because every session has every car that you have your data logger configured to, it might be called RPM, it might be called engine, it might be called engine RPM. In this case, my RPM channel is called ECU underbar RPM, right? So and these math formulas down here are very, very literal. It's not only the word itself, engine. If I push test channel, it goes, there is no engine. in your data file. I don't know what you have as an RPM source. We have to plug in the actual RPM from this particular data file. So what we do is these identifiers is a great way to do that. I can look at it and I see, okay, well, in this particular session, because I'm on that tab, ECU underbar RPM is my RPM channel. We already knew that from looking at make sure it was clean data as well. So then you can come in here and you can type that in, ECU underbar RPM. Okay, you'd think that would work, right? But because it's the same name, right? When I press test channel, it comes back and says error, an identifier or constant or symbol is unknown. While it is the right letters, it is not only what the name is, but it's also capitalization, periods, whatever it happens to be, it's got to be exactly what it's called. So if I were to retype that and do all capitalized letters, it would work. But here's a shortcut for those of you that play with this a lot. I highlighted, I did the test channel, and it says that's the broken one. If I come over to the list, so I don't even have to type it in, if I just double click on the value in this list, it automatically puts it in place. And then I just push the test again, and then it's asking what, there is no speed space #1 in my data file, and there's not. So I'm which speed from what we've talked about earlier today, what's the right thing to have? We have GPS, we have vehicle speed, and overall that comes out of the gearbox. And then we've got all 4 wheel speeds in this particular case. We talked about it and we looked at it. The driven wheel is really the right thing to do, one of the driven wheels. And in this case, we've got a right and a left rear driven wheels in this particular case. And so I want to pick the rear left in this particular case, right? So just you scroll down on this and you find the rear left one. I could type all that in or just double click on it. You notice that it just filled it in and test the channel. It says the formula has been correctly interpreted. Okay, so that will now work if we left it alone. The only thing that we want to do here is these last 2 values. What they are in all of the AIM channels, they work a little different than a normal formula where you actually could whip out your calculator and start typing in some things and just match this formula. This is a special formula. It has that AIM prefix, and it is going to calculate gear for us, and it just is asking for the channels and the high and the low gear that this car did during this run, right? So these are kind of specialized channels where it's just asking you for some information, and I have some documentation that I can that we can send out and talk about all of these, some of the specifics about these if you write me a note and ask for it. In this case, this car went from was first to 6th gear. So in this case, it works out fine. If you only had a 5-speed, you would plug in a 1 and a 5. And sometimes it gets a little confused, and maybe you were never in 1st gear, like the question earlier. You would put a 2 and a 5 if you had a 5-speed and you were never in 1st gear for these entire laps. So you would put a 2 and a 5. I'm sorry. In this case, it is a 7-speed gearbox. And the driver did use 1st as they were leaving the paddock area and all that. So I'm going to leave it as a 1 and a 6. Okay. The math channel is now ready to go, but there's a couple parameters here that just to make this scale correctly and give these little names that are in these little parentheses over here, we like to fill out these boxes. So I'm going to the unit of measure, that's what's in these little parentheses here. It's going to be a gear. It's a I'm going to full scale. It's the scale of, if I pull this out of the way, it's this scale that's right here, right? So it looks like a 7 to maybe 2 would match what I've got over there. So I'm going to put a 7 on the full scale and a 2 on the bottom. How often do we want to calculate it? Let's leave it at 10. I don't want to filter it. I just want to see what it is. And the decimal figures is the number of figures to the right of the decimal place. And I do not need my gear position in 4.00. So I'm going to set that to 0, so it just rounds to the full size number. Okay, when all that's done and we've got that kind of figured out, and I've called it AIM gear, I just left it at the standard name. Let's click on OK. And what has happened here is we've now got a gear, AIM gear up here at the top. I'm going to go ahead and put that down right on top of the AIM, the ECU gear, by just clicking on the little numbers and pushing it down in our scales. Right now it's in the upper one. I'm going to click on that right here and right here. Okay, now I've got, let's make it a blue that's maybe a little bit of a softer blue so we can kind of see it a little bit better. Look how close our calculated gear now using the driven wheel, it shows up over here, and you can see that it matches almost identically with the calculated gear from the gear position sensor. So I wanted to do this and show you guys that this is a great tool, that if you do not have a gear position sensor, yeah, you can spend the time and the effort, put a gear position sensor on the car, and actually have it as an analog channel. But if you don't have that, coming in here and doing the math is not a bad option. You can see that there are slight differences, right? And almost all of those you'll find are in the downshift side, where it's taking that little bit of time to as the clutch comes out, where the gear position sensor, as soon as the driver, probably hand controls in this particular case, as soon as the driver is changing gears, it's working here, but until the clutch is released, that's when the aim gear will calculate its way in. So kind of an interesting thing. The other thing that I wanted to do, though, now that I've done that, is I also built a couple of other math channels. We've been pushing pretty hard for you to use a good speed sensor, right? I've already calculated a couple of these here. An aim gear using the GPS speed, and aim gear using the front wheel speed. Let's bring those into this test and let's take a look at them. And even if you only have GPS speed, maybe you don't have any wheel speeds, but you have RPM, yeah, we're telling you what you probably ought to do to get the best, but how bad does GPS make that look, or front wheel speed that's not a direct connection? I'm going to copy these guys over, and gear front, I'm going to bring in this gear ratio. We'll talk about that one in a moment. I'm going to bring those into my little copy paste box over to here, and then let's paste those into this one. And you'll see that I've got them set at let's change those so the scaling's the same, so they'll hit right. And GPS, let's scale that at 2 so that it's the same as the rest of them. And let's OK on that. So we ended up with a couple more gear channels. I have to go find them. There's one of them here. Let's put that one down in, oops, that's not the one I wanted yet. Here's the other two that I just brought in. Let's turn those on, and let's put those into the third window. So they're all on top of each other. And now look at the difference in how this works. Yes, it's easier for our computer. It's easier for our aim logger if we've got a good, clean, direct driven speed sensor that's directly connected to the RPM, like in this case, my rear wheel speed. But this is pretty darn useful, even if you only had GPS and an RPM. Maybe that's what your ECU protocol had, and you have a solo 2DL, and that's just what you're getting. You didn't get any wheel speeds or something. You can still get some pretty darn good information. There is a little bit of noise in some of them, but it's not the end of the world. They're shifting. Everybody's shifting up at about the same time as far as these results. Fourth gear for all of them, and then within just a short period of time, they're all in fifth gear right as the driver shifted. So pretty cool. I would always continue though to use that good wheel speed. Driven wheel speed to do your calculations. But if you don't have it, don't think in your mind that it just is not going to work for me because we don't have that good driven wheel. You can still do some pretty cool stuff with speed sensors that aren't a direct connection. Okay, perfect. The one last thing I'd like to show you, and maybe there'll be a couple more questions or something, and Cameron might want to add a couple things. But one of the other things that I wanted to show, just so you guys could see it, let's turn off. I'm gonna leave the gears on, and one of the things I have, and it's in the math channels that a lot of you have already asked for. There's a little math channel bundle that I send out to folks that want to maybe play with math channels a little bit more. I've got some spreadsheets where it talks about all of the math channels, and I've got the importable math channel files, so you can just do the import and have them working and ready to go. It's got the switches for when you're on the brakes and when you're not, in the coasting channels and all of that. But one of the ones that's included in there is this one that I call gear ratio T, and of transmission is what we're looking for. I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to bring that down, and I'm going to put it in the box below that, in its own little box right there. Okay, and you can kind of see what we're doing here, and what this. Let me open up the math channel and let you take a look at it. Gear ratio T. Here's the math channel itself, right? And what this is doing is, if you have to know a couple things. If you know your tire size, again, your tire circumference, just the same thing that Cameron talked about on one of those other things, and you know your rear gear ratio, and I've got a math channel description that talks about this maybe a little bit closer. But then we plug in our RPM, again, our tire size, our wheel speed, and this is the driven one, and our rear gear. And then there's some math here that has to happen in order to make it all work. But in the end, what we're showing, what we're outputting here, which is kind of cool, it kind of ties together with this because we're doing calculations, is no matter where I put this cursor, that you can see what the internal gear ratios are of your transmission. So in this case, sixth gear on this 488 challenge car, I went out and did a little bit of research and found the rear gear ratios, the tire sizes, and the transmission gear ratios, just to work it backwards and make sure everything was good, and it is. But look at this. I can put this here, and it's about a 0.89 sixth gear ratio. If I come in here to third gear, you know, the 1.73 on the third gear ratios. You know, here is fourth gear, 1.35. Couple little tricks I do with that is, if you use your delta function, and I can just click at one side and then the other. And one of the things you can turn on your delta function is not only the last click, which would be right here, which is 109. The second value in all of your delta stuff is always the difference between the two clicks. And then you can turn on your delta function by coming to options and settings. You can turn on your delta function. What do you want to show as a third value with it? I'm showing average. Okay. And let me jump out of there. So now that average of that gear, so what we're doing is not allowing the little bit of noise that might happen because of, tire spin or, different things. I'm averaging this entire thing for 1,925 feet or 12.4 seconds of this fifth gear run. And the average gear ratio in that is a 1.10 in fifth gear. So just something you may or may not want to ever play with. It's ratios, and it's math, and it's using RPM versus speed and a couple of other pieces, and you can do some other kind of cool things. One of the things that when we work with some of the different promoters and technical compliance things, sometimes they have classes that are mandated to have certain gear ratios. We share this math channel with them, and then they can look at the data. If they have speed and RPM, they can come right back and double check really quickly that everybody's running the same internal gear ratios, and nobody's maybe changed a gear here or there for performance. Not that racers would ever do that. So a great way to reverse engineer gear ratios. So just something I thought would be kind of cool to understand. So perfect. Any questions that you might have, make sure you throw those up there. David does have one there. He really needs to tell us what the 105.6 converts. I cannot remember. Frankly, off the top of my head, I can't either, but I probably better stop there. But it is part of the math, and it does help it convert it. I think it's, I probably better leave it at there, or else I'll just be guessing at this point. If I looked at the math channel a little bit, I would figure it out as well. But it is there, and I can share that. It's for English numbers. If you're using metric, it would be a different value. But if you want to dig into that a little bit more, send me an email, and we'll get that figured out for you. So perfect. With all that said, Cameron, let's. I'm going to start to back out and get back to my presentation materials. Is there anything else that you would like to add as we kind of start to close this up?
Oh, I think you did a great job, filtering from the calculation that we'll do on our side to being able to see it afterwards. I think you did great.
I think what is so cool about it is you have some options. You as users have some options. If you want gear position, and hopefully your car your ECU will have that gear position in it. If it doesn't, though, not all is lost. We can either calculate it on the fly with the two methods that Cameron talked about, or then we can get it into, once you download the data, we have math channels internally to do that, and we can do some other cool things with the math channels on top of that. So pretty cool. let's talk a little bit about kind of closing this up. We have a big announcement we're going to make on our next webinar. Some of you have been sending me emails about that, so we will talk about that here in just a second. This webinar and all of the webinars that we've been doing, we're up to 93 videos strong on our YouTube site. All of them in depth, with lots of cool information. Go visit our YouTube site. Robbie has linked it a couple of times. I know when I glance over there at the chat box already. Just tons of information that is available for you over there. A lot of times folks will call me and I'll start to explain something in an email, and sometimes I just I jump right to the YouTube site. I find that video. I even link it where it starts, exactly where their question is, and send them the link. There is so much information in not only these webinars, but even the older videos that have been around for a while. Robbie just put a link in there for you to directly go to the YouTube site. So I use that. It's a pretty cool place to go visit and see some pretty neat stuff. Not only short form quick stuff like how to do the GPS lap insert or data views, some of the stuff that we talked about just today, but of course all these webinars that are around an hour long, and then there's 4 or 5 long form webinars where we have done some work with different racing groups and just recorded them, where we talked about a whole bunch of different things and took questions and answers. They're in there as well. So visit the site and take a look. Let's see, the customer support. Boy, I was just chatting with the guys before we started this webinar. Everybody is hitting the road, and that is so good to hear. And I hope that's true for the for those of you users out there that are hopefully you're getting out and heading to racetracks soon. It's been a bad time for a lot of people in the racing industry. That is just our makeup is not to want to sit around at home and grow flowers and such, right? So but very happy for everybody that is getting to be able to head out and start doing that, including our track support guys. I may even head to a track this weekend myself. There's an event down at Portland that I think that maybe I'm going to try to head to, so that'll be fun. I have not been to a race yet since this all started. So where are we going to do next? Here's our little announcement. Thursday, July 9th, just a couple of days away. We're going to bring Emiliano, who is here on our in the background answering questions and doing some of that. You might have seen some of his answers in the chat box or in the Q&A. We're going to announce that on that day we're going to make available the Race Studio 3 Analysis public beta version. And Emiliano is going to come on with us. He's done one before and does a great job. Good friend of mine, and he's going to come on. We're going to chat about the Race Studio Analysis. We're have a quick demo and show you a few things. But the other thing that's going to be happening here is we're gonna make that link available to you. It'll be available to you on that day where you can download the public beta. Keep in mind that it is a public beta, and it is not a complete ready-to-go piece of software. We've demoed it here, and we've been using it in the background occasionally, especially me, where we play with it a little bit, but it is not fully functioned yet. If it's going to install onto your computer in an entirely different place. You are still going to use, without a doubt, you're going to use Race Studio 2 Analysis. You're going to continue to use that. This is a public beta where you're going to come in. Yes, we'll be able to look at some strip charts. We'll be able to do our video and data syncing is up and running and working great. Our Google Earth on the image of the backgrounds of our maps, all of that stuff is there, but it's a limited set of functionality, and it is a beta piece of software. You're going to have trouble occasionally. Don't expect this to be your software that you're going to take to the track, on Saturday after this Thursday webinar. That's just not the way that this is going to work. So, and if you're the type that loves to play in software and tinker around and give feedback, there's going to be some functionality right in the software where you can push a button and it's going to head straight to the software team in Italy where you can give feedback, talk about bugs, enhancements, additional enhancements you'd like to see. This is for you. If if you're that guy that needs to, like I sometimes am with other non-racing softwares, that I need to go to a manual, I need to look something up, and I need you know, a nice video library of things that are done. This is beta. That kind of support is not ready for you. So if you like to get in there and play around, learn some things on your own, and help us, certainly we'll be there to help you do some things as well. But keep in mind that it is a beta, and we are making it public. Anybody that wants to download it can grab it. So that'll be happening July 9th. So please join in on our webinar on Thursday with Emiliano, and we'll announce there where the links are, and how you go out and grab that and download it onto your own machine, bring in some of your data files, and be ready to go. We'll probably have every couple of weeks, we'll have another installment of Race Studio 3 analysis, where we will come back in, talk about some of the changes that have been made, maybe where we're getting lots of comments or lots of questions. Folks can't make it do what they think it ought to do. We'll have a webinar where we talk about, a couple of tips and tricks and how to do those kind of things. So keep that in mind. This is the first step of the beta, and we're looking forward to getting it out there. Have had a lot of people really waiting for this day, and we're pretty excited about it to get it out. We've showed it to you a few times, but looking forward to getting it into your hands as well. So I appreciate that. Let's jump to the last slide. Cameron, thank you very much. This was Cameron's first time he's done a webinar with us. He's been here for virtually all of them. I think he only had to miss one, like I mentioned earlier, but he's been here for all of them. But this is the first one that he has stepped up and co-hosted, and it's a lot of work and a lot of extra work, and I understand that, Cameron, and I appreciate it, and so does everybody else. Anything else you'd like to add on the way out as we kind of close this one down?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate everybody attending. It was a great time. It was a lot of work, but it's worth it. You learn a lot, and hopefully we can pass that information on. So.
Absolutely, and now that you've done one, we'll continue to rope them into more. So again, thank you very much, Cameron. I appreciate it. That whole thing of us learning, we learn as much as the users do as well. Which is just a super benefit of what we do here. So thank you everybody for coming. Again, I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in just a couple of days for our Race Studio 3 beta analysis debut. Look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day, and we'll see you on Thursday.